Good evening, I'm Lester Holt, and thank you for joining us on this very special night. I want to welcome you to our screening of our latest nightly film, Rising Together, Asian American Activists. The rise of anti-Asian attacks over the last year has been troubling, especially for a community facing a battle on multiple fronts, the virus itself and the virus of hate. But out of the hate, new voices are emerging as young Asian Americans are standing up and speaking out. Nightly Films is an extension of NBC Nightly News, a long-form series explaining our world one video at a time. It's a collection of in-depth reporting and interviews that go beyond the headlines to explain our world and how we live our lives. And now we're so proud to share with you our latest nightly film, Rising Together, Asian American Activists. Here's NBC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicky Nguyen.
We are America!
As the world grappled with the coronavirus, Asian Americans found themselves fighting an additional crisis this past year, a rise in racially motivated attacks.
Stop Asian hate! Love Asian people!
The harassment hit Team USA karate Olympian Sakura Kokumai,
You're a loser. Go home. Loser, go home, stupid.
who was training in a Southern California park.
When he walked closer, that's where I did get scared a little bit because you just never know what could happen.
Her case, one of many.
They started hurling racial insults. They started calling me Chinese virus.
Get out of our country! Get out!
He's like, communist China?
Oh, isn't that where you're from?
But when the images of Asian American elders being slashed, beaten, even killed in broad daylight began flooding social media,
If you see one of our sisters and brothers in need, will you help us?
the hashtag Stop Asian Hate prompted new attention.
To see people like my parents who have given their lives to this country and to see that this is the reward for their hard work, for putting their heads down and believing in the American dream is hard.
Now, a new generation rising up.
Stop Asian hate!
High school students Daisy Kemp, Amanda Koo, and Jason Shan organizing for the first time.
Enough is enough. We have to stop this.
The people that were being attacked just looked like people that could be in my family or like my relatives.
We hear about racism. We hear about a lot of hate in the news, but then all of a sudden it's kind of your community. You're being brought into this problem and you think, I should do something about it. I should have done something about it long ago.
Stop Asian hate!
More than 300 people came together in Mountain View, California to stop Asian hate. The Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism found anti-Asian hate crimes reported to police rose nearly 190% in the first quarter of 2021 compared to the same time last year. Stop AAPI Hate reported more than 6,600 incidents in just 1 year. Anti-Asian sentiment has deep roots in history, according to May Nye, a professor of Asian American Studies at Columbia University.
The whole history of immigration policy towards Asians has its origins in the Chinese Exclusion Act, which said Chinese could not enter this country. They could never be Americans.
How much has that sentiment lingered?
A lot of that lingers. There's still this lingering idea that Asians don't belong here.
It is a strange phenomenon for a lot of Asians to go from being invisible to hypervisible. Explain that.
Well, a lot of us are taught to be quiet and keep our heads down. And now I think people realize that our lives matter and we have to say something about it and we have to speak up.
I'm Michelle Cal.
I'm CJ Hibbert.
Michelle and CJ are students at Brooklyn Tech in New York. They met after Michelle's teacher suggested she reach out for Black and Gold solidarity.
You're president of the Black Student Union.
Yes.
Why is it so important for all of these students from these backgrounds to come together?
We are all diverse and we all have our intersectionalities and all of them matter. And we live in a society that can at times demean those and they can vilify us for those differences that we all have.
Michelle, what did your parents think when you said, I want to start organizing, I want to be an activist?
My parents were like, bruh, stop. Literally, they're like, what's the point, you know? And that really made me so angry. We can't only care about us, because the issue about racial justice isn't about one community. It's about all of us coming together.
Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Asian lives matter! Asian lives matter!
Using movement to fuel a movement. Coffee co-founded the group running to protest after the murder of George Floyd.
We're basically using our platform to bring the community together.
Hundreds now gather one Sunday a month to call attention to injustice.
When everything went down last summer, 2020, I saw some of the Asian community out there for us, and it was only right for us to do the exact same.
This year, as anti-Asian violence started to rise, Coffee joined with longtime friend and fashion designer Debby Soo. They organized the first Black and Gold Solidarity Run in March.
I think running is a perfect metaphor for activism, right? As a runner, we cover so much ground. We're always in the street.
Hours after the flyer went out about the run, news broke of the Atlanta spa shootings.
Tonight, we're learning more about the 8 victims. 6 of them are of Asian descent.
For many Asian Americans, the tragedy was a tipping point, hitting after months of violence against the community. Days later, 2,000 people showed up for running to protest.
We come together as a community today in fear, in anguish, in outrage, in terror, but more importantly, in support of one another.
For a lot of people outside, maybe New York or a diverse community, they don't see that a lot. They don't see Black and Asian solidarity. Why is it important for you to come together and say these two communities can support each other and should support each other?
At the end of the day, we're all going to go through the same thing, right? I remember my grandfather told me, regardless on what color you are, everybody bleeds the exact same color, which is red.
There's a long history of sort of division between the two communities.
How do you overcome that division?
I think the way that you overcome it is to have, conversations about what are the causes of those divisions. There needs to be sort of a reckoning within the Asian community that there is sort of anti-Blackness that exists from generation to generation. And so, we have to address that head on. We have to be honest about it. We have to educate our kids about it.
Activating not only through education and our voices, but money too.
Support the companies and businesses that you know are aligned with your belief system.
Debby Soo was named the CEO of OpenTable last year. It's an online restaurant reservation service.
What was your own experience recently with anti-Asian hate?
A few weeks ago, I was in a New Hampshire grocery store, and someone behind me in line was glaring at me and then said, "You don't belong here."
Even now, in 2021, even as the CEO of a major company?
Yes, even now. No one knows that I'm the CEO of OpenTable. No one knows that I went to Stanford or MIT. When I walk into a grocery store, I am just an Asian woman. I'm the other. In some people's eyes, perhaps I don't belong.
Debby joined thousands of Asian American business leaders and allies who collectively pledged $10 million to support Asian American community groups.
Activism isn't just about picketing and marching. It's about practicing allyship. It's about speaking up when you see something that doesn't seem right or feel right.
And with ongoing violence targeting Asian Americans coast to coast, in New York City alone, police have recorded at least 40 incidents in the first 3 months of this year.
One snap kick, and then hammer fist. Good.
Activism also taking the form of agency as Asian Americans turn to self-defense training to protect themselves and their families. The Chinese Hawaiian Kenpo Academy offered free courses helping people find confidence and community.
You're taking a walk outside, you carry your water bottle, and this can go the other way too, right? So we can go down.
Assistant instructor Kong Dao and program director Jane Ray showed how everyday items like a phone or water bottle can help someone escape an attack.
She's using her phone, and I'm approaching her, right? And you notice that she's using the phone, and she goes for the soft part of my body, which is the throat.
Right.
She's using her whole body. She's not just using her arm, right? Because she wants to have a lot of power.
They encourage bystanders to be prepared too. In many cases, just yelling or calling attention to what's happening can stop an attack.
What do you think when you see the activism that's happening right now?
I'm really encouraged. I'm really encouraged by the young people, by high school students, college students, young adults, getting out there and speaking out. And I'm really encouraged by the solidarities that are being shown in our community with other people of color.
Now the next generation building on that history.
We're in the position that we are because of the generation before us, because of our parents and the sacrifices that they made.
Rising together, activists combating hate and using their power to stand together against racism.
Make a movement, make change. We can be the ones who go out to help other youths be empowered, to lift them up.
It's really easy to feel like you can't do anything as a young person. Seeing other young people around me making changes in their own community, no matter how big or how small, has been really inspiring for me.
My generation is the next generation. We're going to be the next lawmakers, senators, the next politicians and doctors. If we want to see the change that we're advocating for right now, we have to start it young.
Hello, thank you everyone. That was such an emotional roller coaster, and I hope it left you with a moment of uplift at the end. And I think our future is in good hands when we see young people like that standing up and speaking out, and bravo to them. I'm Vicky Nguyen. I'm going to serve as your moderator tonight. Thank you for joining us for this very special screening of Rising Together, Asian American Activists. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears really went into this production, and I am so excited to continue the conversation with our fabulous panelists tonight. We have Norman Chen. He is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of LAAUNCH, Leading Asian Americans to Unite for Change. Debby Soo, you just saw her there. She is the Chief Executive Officer of OpenTable. And another familiar face, Brian T., who is an activist and an actor who is starring right now on NBC's Chicago Med, which actually shoots in freezing cold Chicago. So thank you all so much for being here. Norman, I'm going to start right off with you. LAAUNCH just did a really interesting and insightful survey of almost 3,000 Americans. You asked quite a few different questions in this online survey. The stats coming out of the research are eye-catching. For one example, you asked people to name a well-known Asian American. The number one answer you received was, I don't know, followed by Jackie Chan. 11% of people said Jackie Chan, which I'm not even sure if he's considered technically Asian American. I think he's just Asian. And 9% of people said Bruce Lee. Tell me about some of the other stats that came out of that survey, and what does that mean to you to see the lack of knowledge and how Asian Americans feel right now in 2021?
Yeah, it was a shocking result, Vicky, in our research. What we found is that these stereotypes, the model minority stereotype, the perpetual foreigner stereotype, the yellow peril stereotype, really persist in America today. And we were shocked to see how persistent they were. Besides the fact that we were invisible and 42% could not name a prominent Asian American, 20% of Americans said that Asian Americans are more loyal to their country of origin than to the U.S. So basically, they're questioning our patriotism, our Americanism, and therefore continuing to see us as the perpetual foreigner.
What is it that your organization LAAUNCH wants to do to change some of these stats?
Number one is we were shocked to find that in the U.S., there hasn't been a comprehensive study of American attitudes towards Asian Americans in 20 years. There's a lot of good research looking within the Asian American community, but looking how we're perceived by non-Asian Americans is really, really important. So we conducted this study to make people aware of the fundamental root causes of these hate crimes and violence. It's the stereotype, it's the prejudice that exists, and these need to be addressed before we do anything else.
It's so so meaningful, I think, that we're having this conversation today, the day President Biden signed in the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which in part some people are critical of because they think it's too much criminalization, too much focus on police. And what you're saying is, no, we need to address the root causes, which is helping people understand that Asian Americans are American, that we do belong. Let me ask you, Brian, it's great to see you again. You spoke out for our last special, The Racism Virus. We didn't have enough time, so I'm hoping we'll get more of your thoughts this time. You've been speaking out about these issues affecting the Asian American community. What do you think of representation of our community in Hollywood, both in front of the camera and behind the camera in leadership positions?
Well, thank you for having me again, Vicky. It's great to be here with everyone else. I gotta say, there was a report that just came out by Dr. Nancy Yang Nguyen about this same subject, and the numbers are staggering. Over, I guess, 1,300 top films in the last, I believe, 13 to 14 years. There's only about 5.9 AAPI representing actually speaking roles, and the majority of those were stereotypes, were tropes. So the stigma of the continual being invisible, the perpetual foreigner, these stereotypes and myths and model minority anecdotal situations are just staggering in that particular subject. So I feel right now this new wave, and that was done and it was cut off at 2019, I believe. And there's this sense of movement and kind of hope that you were alluding to after your wonderful segment there. That is inspiring. It's the young people, it's the people of the now, it's the people on this panel, but I feel also the older generation is starting to really kind of take wind and take effect and really kind of use their voice or their inability to use their voice in a way that is much more powerful now than it ever was before. And I think that is a cultural transition that we're all kind of existing in right now as we move forward.
Brian, you're an actor in Hollywood. It's such a highly visible position that you have in society. Do you, though, sometimes feel, especially with the research you just cited, that you have there's a disproportionate, representation of like who you are and what you can do, and then how do you, as one person who's made it, right? Like you are in a primetime show, hit show, but there's not enough of you. There's not enough of you out there, or people that look like you or me. So how do you kind of in your own life and in your own pursuits try to like open the door and expand the opportunities?
I think that's what I guess my form of activism is. I think it's really trying to knock on these doors of corporations and creatives and executives and really say, why am I the only one? There is a sense of responsibility for myself, especially being on a network of such mass proportion, that there needs to be a lot more representation. And I'm given this opportunity, right, as like the Highlander per se, but I no longer want to be that. It needs to open up a lot more for the generations to come, the ones that are here really struggling and working to really change that particular narrative moving forward. And it's not just about tokenizing, right? It's not just about, well, we have one and we check something off the box. We need to have more, and we also need to have that wealth of storytelling to really be able to communicate to the audience about who we are individually, to create that understanding for one another that really can kind of breed that bridge to change the narrative and to hopefully move us as a community further and further down the line.
Mm-hmm. You feel a sense of responsibility. I think, Debbie, you've talked about that too. That anecdote that you shared in the piece about being in line at the grocery store and having some guy turn to you and say, you don't belong. I mean, it's infuriating to me now. And I heard that story weeks ago. You lead a successful company and you're at the tippy top. And what would you say to our younger members of our audience or folks who feel like they don't belong and that they're the other? How did you push forward and succeed and get to where you are? And what do you wish you would have known when you were younger?
There's a lot to unpack in there, Vicky. And thank you for having me on the panel and including me in that segment. It's very well done and very poignant and powerful. I would say, personally, what I've done in my life is I suppress it, and I've developed a thick skin. And I think for a lot of Asian Americans, as these events have occurred, people have started to be more vocal and communicative about and sharing about what they've gone through in their childhoods growing up in the U.S. And there's this sense of, wow, like I didn't realize other people went through that too. Like that happened to me and that happened to a lot of other people. So it's wonderful those conversations are happening. But I think historically, we just swept it under the rug, right? Like we got teased at school, a myriad of, very common events that you hear about. And we just didn't really talk about it. And for me, I certainly did that too. It happened. And I just kept pushing forward, and you develop, or I developed at least, thick skin. And for me, I mentioned this when we spoke a few weeks ago. It was a turning moment in my life when I saw Andrea Jung, who was who's the ex-CEO of Avon, on a magazine cover. I think I was a teenager, and it was the first time in my life I'd seen an Asian American woman, as a business leader in that way. And for me, I was like, wow, that's possible, right? And that just points to how important representation it matters. You can't be what you can't see. And so for the young folks out there listening, talk about it, right? Because oftentimes if you're going through it, someone else is probably going through it too. And then keep pressing forward and keep fighting that good fight. For me, I'm lucky that, yes, you're right, I have a platform. What did you call it? The tippy top? I don't know if I'd call it that, but I'm at the helm of a well-known company, and so it's my responsibility to use that voice and my seat at the table.
When I think CEO, I think tippy top, and you unpack that beautifully. And Norman, we talk about this. Look, I think what you said is spot on. There is something to be said about having a thick skin and not being the victim. And I think that that's what we see in a lot of success stories is people fought against the odds and they didn't allow themselves to be victims. But also the second component of standing up, speaking out, not just continuing to take it. How is an organization like LAAUNCH, how can people get involved? How can they help? And what's your message to not just the Asian American community, but also the broader community?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to highlight, Vicky, how we came about in forming LAAUNCH. We were actually a group of friends who've been lifelong friends. We've had careers in multiple fields, mostly in business. Last fall, we decided, there's just so much negativity about Asian Americans. We had to do something. And so to the point made by Debbie and others, everyone has a role to play here, okay? No matter your background. So we have business experience, we have entrepreneurial experience. A lot of us are investors. And so we bring our entrepreneurship to the table. We try to help great organizations that are out there already do even more impactful work. And so what we tell everybody now who want to get involved is look at your skills, look at your network, see how you can help. It's not going to be a singular battle. This requires, the whole country, frankly, to get involved and to move forward. So we really encourage people to look at what you can bring to the table. Do you have resources? Do you have friends? Do you have skills? And volunteer, get involved with these organizations like ours. It's really powerful and really excited to see the younger generation also activating. We have a lot of hope in seeing their energy because their attitudes are different from even my generation or my parents' generation. The youngsters, they're much more willing to mix and mingle with other groups that are different from theirs, unlike our parents. And they are very savvy about social media, which is really important. And most, I think, really, really critical is they're defiant. They're like, we grew up in the States. You're treating us as second-class citizens. They don't have the patience that maybe our parents' generation and we maybe have. They are just ready to make change right away, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. We all do have a sphere of influence, and it starts with us identifying what we can do, what we can contribute. Brian, I'm very curious because you are in a field that is not one that most Asian parents celebrate when they hear, I want to be an artist or an actor. I want to pursue theater. So tell me a little bit about what that journey was like for you and for all the Asian Americans who are watching who might want to go into a non-traditional field, like not engineering, medicine, pretty much, or being a lawyer, right?
Yeah, I think I went through the same journey as most, I guess, my generation kind of went through. And from immigrant parents coming to America, you're either a doctor or a lawyer, and that's it. That's the choice. And you're kind of groomed and breeded in such a way where that is kind of the end goal. And when you try to get outside of that particular box, it's tough. And it's very isolating, and you're in a different world without necessarily the support or the understanding from, say, your parents or your in-laws or whatever the case might be. So I definitely took a black sheep approach, a left field approach, a different kind of mentality when, kind of pursuing the arts. But as I tell kind of all young people, is like, you have to follow your passions, you have to pursue your dreams, or else, then what's the point in that particular sense too? And if you are gifted with that particular grace, right? And I always say that I've been blessed with grace twice in my life. Once when I found acting, and the other time was when I met my wife. But in finding that particular grace was such a gift to me because I knew what I wanted to do. And in that particular sense, yes, I pursued it, and I'm very fortunate to be in this situation, but it was extremely hard and difficult and continues to be. I'm known to play Asian bad guys, and I've played a slew of them and made almost a career out of them up until now. And it's been a tough road to climb. And I guess the funny part, just to kind of answer the particular question, is even to today, when I'm playing a doctor on TV, my mom still asks if I'm going back to school to get my law degree. Literally. And that was like last year. And I'm doing okay. I'm doing pretty good. So I think that that sentiment or that mentality or that generation just has that bred in them, that success is kind of driven at a particular level or a particular idea or ideal. Whereas we all know success is kind of driven through passion. Success is driven, especially to the younger generation, through that love and that kind of devotion of doing what you love to do. So yeah, it's been a tough road, and hopefully someday I'll make my mom proud and maybe play a lawyer on TV.
You're so close. You're in Scrubs. Could you just get into medical school is what she's asking.
Right, exactly. Like I know some terminology, right? Maybe there's like a Cliff Notes version or something. If I could just get a piece of paper that says like I have a degree in something, that would fulfill kind of all of my mom's wishes, I guess.
I love it. I love it. She's still kind of pushing you, which is good. That's what moms do. Debby, you have children, and you are in this position now where you're leading a company. How are you finding ways to talk to your kids about what it's like being in your role, which I think at this point is still fairly male dominated, right? Most CEOs of companies and Fortune 500, et cetera, are usually white men. So when you find yourself in those rooms where maybe you're the only person who looks like you, or you have a perspective that is very unique, how do you wield that? And how do you make your concerns known?
At work, I feel like I've learned over the years to navigate through. Like there's armor I can don at work. I drive KPIs. I know the business. I'm credentialed. What's hard for me is in those everyday moments, right? At the grocery store, for example. And when I speak so my son's 2.5, he's half Asian and he's half white. He looks very Asian. And that's interesting in itself. And we were living in New Hampshire up until a few weeks ago. Now we're back in California. He knows that Mama's a CEO, but Baba is also a CEO. My husband's a founder and CEO of his own company. And so for him, Steven's just, it's like, yeah, like my parents, that's what they do. And so I don't think he's quite there yet to realize like, wow, my parents are crazy people with very demanding jobs. I've been struggling a lot on how to speak about this to him when he's at an age, and it's coming, right, to help him understand. And I've had many friends who are Asian Americans whose kids are older and who've had that conversation. And what do you say? And then there's an element of him being, mixed racially. And Dad is very supportive, but Dad's not Asian, and Dad, is a tall white man. Like I don't know if Dad knows. Like what the experience of being the other is, right? So we grapple with that all the time. It was part of the reason why we decided to move back to the Bay Area as well, is to let Steven grow up in a place where there are other people who look like him. That's, like and I grew up in the Bay Area, in the 80s. Like now you think of the Bay Area, it's a very large Asian American population, but in the 80s, that wasn't always the case. And so I felt very marginalized, like I was the only Asian kid in school. And so that's a certain type of burden that I don't necessarily want to saddle him with, because he's going to get that at some point in his life. So let's at least in his upbringing, in his childhood, surround him with lots of different kinds of people who look like him, people who don't look like him, and have that be like what's normal. But yeah, like it's, I haven't gotten it right. So if anyone has advice, I'm all ears.
Norman, before you became the co-founder and CEO of LAAUNCH, you were in business, is that right?
Yeah, I'm a healthcare venture capitalist. So I've been investing in healthcare companies and starting up healthcare companies my whole career in Asia and in the US. And I guess to your earlier point, Debbie, I grew up in Maryland where there were even fewer Asians than in California, and kind of went through my Asian identity experience through college in Boston. But then I spent 20 years as an adult in Hong Kong and lived in the majority. And it's really an empowering experience. And I know Brian also has spent time in Asia. And so our kids were born and raised in Hong Kong. And so they, from the very beginning, felt empowered as Asian and Asian Americans. And so to this day, they kind of, rarely when they do thank us for things, they say, gosh, I really appreciate that we got the chance to grow up in Asia. And that's really a special experience. And you see that, most people in the U.S., don't have that minority experience that we experienced, and that's why we feel so discriminated against. But for some people, they are able to spend time overseas and have more representation, which is really important. They have, a better sense of identity.
Yeah, Debbie, you earlier talked in our piece about the letter that you signed along with all those business leaders as well as allies, and it was a pledge of $10 million. Can you give us an update? I think it's up to 8,000 people have signed on at this point. What will happen with that money? And also, how can we as consumers make a difference with the brands that we support?
Sure. It's been, to answer your first question, what's going to happen to that money? So it's being donated to various nonprofits that are supporting the AAPI community in education, in law, in just reporting the incidents and having the resources to support all of that. In terms of what we all can be doing, I meant what I said, when you interviewed me, picketing, voting with your wallet, is all of those are things, supporting businesses or shows that are, representative of your belief system, but also speaking up, right? Like we all live our lives, and, we have spheres of influence on our platforms, but we also have spheres of influence just in our lives, at the grocery store, at our kids' school, or, whatever it is, and at work, and just saying something and being an ally. I was recently at work. It was a not so great incident, just like on the line of like, it was ignorance, but I had some white colleagues, it didn't happen to me. It happened to a colleague of mine, but just the allyship that I heard was so powerful, and it just made me feel like, oh my goodness, like I'm supported. I do belong. So I would say speaking up and practicing that allyship is one of the best and most powerful things you could do.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for that piece of advice. And I'm going to start with you, Brian, but I'm going to give a heads up to Norman and Debbie. Can you share with me a time, either when you were a kid or even recently as an adult, where you experienced an incident of racism and how you dealt with it, or what you learned from it, or something you took away from it? Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
No, it's okay. I feel like I've dealt with it a lot of times, and just to try to, I guess, compartmentalize everything that we're talking about here. I didn't necessarily face racism until I actually got into the industry. Funny enough, I grew up in a very multicultural suburb just outside of LA. I went to Berkeley, and it was very multicultural. Definitely had a lot of Asian representation. So I didn't feel like the other in a particular sense until I got into the industry, where the industry told me you are the other. You are in this box and you can only play these roles, right? These Asian bad guy, stereotypical trope particular roles. And as an actor and an artist, you think you can play anything, but the industry doesn't allow you to.
Wow.
And so that was kind of the first kind of non to your face way of saying, like, your race matters in not a great way. And so here's how we're going to treat you, how we're going to pay you, here's how we're going to cast you. And so it's those kind of, I guess, off tilt situations that I had to kind of come up in that has really led me to wanting to, like Debbie said, speak up and speak out. Now that, you know, I'm in this particular position, I really truly feel that responsibility because I've lived it, and I know we all are continuing to live that particular state. One of the incidences that I guess did come across with myself, and to really kind of draw a particular line about speaking up and speaking out, was I was on set, there was a scene, and it was a predominantly Asian cast. It was about my character and his family. And a white Caucasian male director comes in and he says, "My Crazy Rich Asians scene." And we all pause for a second. And instead of just letting it go, I pulled him and quickly took him to the side. And I said, "You can't do that." And he says, "What do you mean?" So he was a bit delusional about what he was actually doing. And I explained to him how that was racist. But I had to compartmentalize it in a sense of, and here's why. If you had all of my African-American Black series regulars in one scene, and you came in and said, "My Black Panther episode," would you say that? And he suddenly got woke. And he was like, "Oh, I didn't mean it." And then all of these explanations about why and this, that, and the other. Now, I share that story, and I've shared it several times before, because before this particular situation, I might have just let it slide. Mm-hmm. You know, I might have just been worried about my job or the situation, or maybe just kind of said, it's okay, he doesn't know any better. But now, as Debbie was saying, as Norman has been saying, those times are over, right? Call it like it is. Speak up and speak out. And if you're an ally, you need to do the same in the exact same way. And I think the younger generation have that guts and that swagger to do so because they don't know anything different like how we grew up with. And that's what inspires me the most.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, Brian. Norman, could you share? I mean, that was interesting because you grew up in a majority Asian country and you kind of like armed your kids with that. They grew up feeling that support and confidence, which is amazing. But did you have a time, or have they shared an incident where something like that has happened to them? And how did they deal with it, or what did they take from it? Oh, I can't hear you, Norman. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, maybe I'll give you two quick examples.
Yeah.
When we were in Hong Kong, we traveled for a holiday, and one year went to Australia. And we were on the beach just having a good time, and somebody threw a water balloon and hit our family, like literally hit us from like far away. And I was just shocked to see what was going on. And sure enough, there were some kids out there calling racist terms. And you know, we were really incensed, and we went down and we chased them down and we gave them a scolding, just like our parents would do. So that was, you know, a way of just, you know, wanting to confront the issue and not let it slip by. The other example is more recent. You know, I play in a basketball league, and I'm one of the few Asian guys in the league. And there was one play where I stole the ball from a guy and I ran down the court to do a layup, and the guy just totally took me out. I mean, it was a bit of a revenge. And you know, in that situation, I didn't, you know, kind of raise the tension even more. I just kind of took it. But, you know, obviously he got called for the foul. And what I did for the rest of the league was just really try to play hard and show that, hey, I'm here to represent Asian Americans. You know, we may not be the tallest guys out there, but we love sports like everybody else. And, you know, gradually over time, I think we built some respect. So, you know, different ways to address different situations. And I think you have to have that flexibility, but I don't think you should take it sitting down. You have to resist and be defiant.
Debbie, I was on a panel recently where a woman said something she regretted when she was younger coming up. She's in a leadership role like you are, was that she tried to just not be Asian. Like she tried to just be like everybody else and like fit in and assimilate. And then she just realized, why was I doing that? Because everybody who looked at me knew I was Asian. And now that I embrace my identity, it's actually just so much better. Did you ever go through that? And what would be your advice to someone who feels like they, they want to start embracing their identity, but they're in maybe a corporate or a political role, and it can be dicey?
I don't think I ever went through that as an adult. I think when I was a child, my parents spoke Mandarin to me, and that was the language we spoke primarily at home and outside the home. And I remember feeling really mortified and embarrassed, right? Because we'd get some looks, and when we're at a restaurant, I would order for them in English. Like I was translating for them all the time. I mean, their English is passable, but not native fluency. As I came into my own more and more throughout my career, I started really embracing my Asianness. So when I was at Kayak prior to OpenTable, I was the vice president of Asia Pacific. So I was flying to Asia, 2 to 3 times every month. And I almost made a show of it, like at the office, when I was back in Connecticut or in Boston. I mean, I would eat yogurt with chopsticks. I'd make sure I was speaking, when I would talk to my mom on the phone, I made sure I was speaking loud enough so people could hear that I was speaking Chinese, just to show, like, yeah, I'm here, this is what it is, almost to make up for the fact that I was kind of ashamed of it growing up. And in terms of racist incidents or incidents that just don't quite sit right, I think I've been very fortunate in progressing quickly through or up in my career. And throughout the time, there's always been some grumblings of, oh, she made it there because she's an Asian woman. And, to that I say, I made it here despite the fact that I'm an Asian woman, and it is not easy getting on a Zoom or in a meeting when you are the only person who looks like you in the room. So, like for me, it's just like, I can't wait. I echo what people have been saying on this call, like what Brian has been saying. I'm so inspired by this next generation. They absolutely, those young adults that you interviewed, just that energy and that passion and that swagger, like they've not known anything else. So like they're going to do even better than what we've been able to do. And I just can't wait to see it.
I've got a couple minutes before I have to let you go, but Norman, a closing thought, Brian, a closing thought, and Debbie, I mean, that was a wonderful closing thought, so feel free to add if you'd like, but your words have been so inspiring, your stories have been so candid and open and vulnerable, and by the way, I just love how you're overcompensating by eating yogurt with chopsticks. That is an image that is going to stay with me, and something I may have to try someday. Norman, go for it.
Yeah, no, so thanks so much for having me on the program. It's fantastic. From our point of view, this year was the first year for our research. We've set the baseline to understand what the status is of Asian Americans in the U.S. We're very excited every year going forward to measure this going forward, because as you know, unless we have the metrics, we can't really measure progress. And we're hoping over time, through the combined efforts of all these wonderful activists, that we can increase awareness, do more educational programs, create better role models for Asian Americans. And I am optimistic, despite all the gloom and doom out there, of the future, because of the young people, because of the activism that's really bubbling up within our community. So, looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you. And that's LAAUNCH, LAAUNCH.org, right?
Right. All Asian American organizations have 2 A's. So just think of LAAUNCH with 2 A's.
Got it. That's right. Brian, your closing thoughts.
I guess just to everyone out there, especially the younger generation who are already doing it, embrace your Asianness, embrace being AAPI, be proud of it. I think the rhetoric right now about, stopping Asian hate and us being the victims of all these things, I feel right now needs to transition into us being strong, us stepping up, us speaking up and speaking out. And I think the new hashtag should be AAPI strong. Asian strong, because that's who we are, and everyone needs to know about it.
Yeah,
love it. I'm gonna start doing that. I love that. Debbie, take us away.
That's a lot of pressure. I would definitely echo what everyone's been has been said. But it's a gift to be. It's a gift to be able to, for some of us who have immigrant parents, straddle 2 worlds, who have spent time in Asia. That richness, that complexity, it gives us a fuller life. It gives our kids a fuller life. And so really looking at it through that lens, we are so fortunate to have views and lenses into an American life, and the life that our parents or countries that our parents came from, I think that's a plus, and that makes us stronger.
Hashtag AAPI strong. I love it. That is all that we have time for tonight. Our deepest gratitude to our panelists for being here for this very important conversation, insightful as well. And I also want to thank our producer, Michelle Cho, and our senior producers, Janelle Richards and Jamie Nguyen, who worked tirelessly to put this 11-minute film together. Rising Together, Asian American Activists. It is now also available on the NBC News YouTube, so you can watch it again and again and again, and please share it. Thank you everyone so much. It was a pleasure to see your faces, to hear your voices, to be touched by your thoughts. I'm Vicky Nguyen, and for all of us at NBC News Tonight, thank you and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.